we go to a topic we've been talking quite a bit about today. Shevin has touched on it. Other speakers have touched on it, which I think is dear to all of our hearts, is basically exploring a little bit about the longevity journey. And we have a globally recognized experts and founder in this space that I'm really, really excited. So please give a warm welcome to Chris Mirabile. All right. So you can already see his company NOVOS placed well here on stage. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself and how do you get hooked into this quite exciting space?
Sure. So I'm an entrepreneur for 20 years now. I've been interested in health ever since I was 12 years old, and my story basically starts when I was 16. So this is a long story, but I'll keep it quick. So when I was 16 years old, I was in New York City on a school trip. And I suddenly started feeling dizzy and nauseous. And the next thing I knew, I woke up with blood all over my shirt. And it had turned out I had just had a seizure and severed my tongue. And that seizure was caused by a brain tumor. And it was larger than the golf ball above my left ear. And I needed emergency surgery, radiation, and so on. And fortunately, my life was spared. I'm missing half of my brain. At least that's what I say when I forget something. But it really transformed my perspective on health, whereas prior it was focused on the more superficial side of health, like just wanting to be in good shape and play sports well and so on. But then I realized that health is about the absence of disease and the optimization of our biology. And so I'm more of a scientifically minded person, so I would go to scientific journals and try to learn as much as I could about the cutting edge of science. And about 10 years ago, I came across a scientific paper in a prestigious journal called Cell, and that paper was called The Hallmarks of Aging. And this was an epiphany moment for me. This is when I realized that aging is actually something that's malleable. Most people think that aging is written in our genetic code, but it's actually only between 10 to 30% genetic for the vast majority of us. And most of it actually comes down to lifestyle and environment. And in addition, we can accelerate our aging. A lot of us know this intuitively when we think about cigarette smoke or excess alcohol consumption and so on. But we can also decelerate the aging process. And so this was the event where I realized that this is what I want to focus on, because the #1 risk factor for cancer, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, you name it, is aging. Even more than cigarette smoke causes lung cancer, aging does, by about threefold. So that's when I realized that this is my passion, that a life passion really, that I wanted to focus on.
That's absolutely amazing. Mind-blowing story. What I'd love to dive in a little bit more, and you touched briefly on this, is longevity. There's many, many definitions, right? Like there's all like live forever or other terms. Can you expand a little bit on like what is like your definition of longevity and what you're going after?
Sure, that's a very well-informed question. So there are different definitions for longevity. So if you ask a scientific researcher, oftentimes they'll say longevity is maximum species lifespan. So this is looking at a given species, maybe mice, or in the case of humans, that number is 122 years. It's held by a French lady, Jeanne Calment. And so they're oftentimes looking at longevity interventions as things that can extend us beyond that 122 years. More pragmatically, the way that we think of it at NOVOS is first and foremost an extension of health span, so the period of life that you live without any sort of chronic illness. And then as a secondary effect of that is then an extension of lifespan, because what good would it be if you lived 130 years if you were sick for 30 years, right? So we want to minimize what's called the health span lifespan gap as much as possible, and focus on quality of life, and then as a result of that is a longer life as well.
Yeah, 122 years is, I think, like a long time for anybody in the audience here. I don't think I've not seen anybody even remotely close to that here in the audience. So that's like very inspirational, and I mean, if you can contribute in cracking that, that's obviously like a massively positive impact on humanity at scale. So I want to deep dive a little bit like on like the mechanisms that you write on your blog and that you share like about with your companies. So you have this thing like the 12 mechanisms of aging that you're trying to address simultaneously. Can you talk a little bit about those and what does that mean in practical terms for people here looking to learn about healthy lifespan?
Sure.
Or health span?
Sure. So the mechanisms of aging are what I refer to, also synonymous with hallmarks of aging. So that paper that I mentioned, back then, this was a decade ago, they had recognized or discovered 9 different mechanisms of aging. And now that number has increased. As of last year, those original authors increased it to 12. So the mechanisms of aging are the root cause biological reasons why we age. This is what's happening microscopically within our bodies, within our cells, as we get older. Some of this you're probably familiar with. For example, stem cell rejuvenation. As you get older, you have fewer stem cells, and these are the cells that make replicas of our cells. You have fewer, and then the ones you do have make imperfect replicas. So that's one of the 12. Another one you might know of is mitochondrial dysfunction. So these are the power plants of our cells. They take the food we eat and convert them into energy. You might remember the Krebs cycle from high school biology. It's happening within the mitochondria. But you have fewer of those, and they're less capable of producing energy. And so if the cell doesn't have adequate energy, it doesn't function properly, and by extension, the tissue and the organ. But then there are less commonly known mechanisms of aging, things like cellular senescence. These are zombie cells, as people like to call them, that accumulate in our bodies, and they release inflammatory molecules that then lead to nearby cells becoming damaged and potentially senescent as well. So it goes up exponentially, and it's one of the reasons our skin wrinkles. And so there's an attempt to delete or remove these cells with substances known as senolytics. So that's just 3 of them. Most of the other ones are not really that well known either, but my vision was to address all of the mechanisms simultaneously, because when I got into the field about 6 or 7 years ago, and I was networking with scientists in the field, it was immediately apparent that everything they were working on was either very advanced biotech, where they are inventing a brand new molecule, the pharmaceutical approach essentially, or it was academia, where they're just focused on a specific mechanism. So overall, nobody was able to address all of the hallmarks at once, because aging is not considered a disease by the FDA or EFSA, and therefore you won't get insurance reimbursements and so on for the products. But my approach was to use natural molecules that have been found to have a positive effect on these mechanisms and create a synergistic formula that's able to address all 12 of these at the same time. And that's what we did. We were the first company in the world to create something like that. That flagship product is called NOVOS Core. And we have done a lot of research at labs across the world, typically academic labs, that find that we reduce DNA damage, reduce cellular senescence, reduce a process known as oxytosis ferroptosis, which is associated with Alzheimer's and cancer. We reduce cellular inflammation. We did a human case study where we found that we were able to slow down the rate of aging for 3/4 of the participants by the equivalent of 1 month per year. And the 1/4 that did not slow down, they actually didn't accelerate, which is most likely us protecting them from any sort of acceleration. And then we also have animal studies that we haven't published yet, but if you keep an eye out in a few months, you'll see that we've done something that nobody has ever done before.
Yeah, I really deeply appreciate just listening to you, the scientific approach that you take in this, right? Like in the field, there's so much like pseudoscience and promises and so on. How have you been able to absorb and learn all of this knowledge? Because you're not like, I mean, your first startup was in real estate tech, right? Like, so you're not like originally like from that field. How have you managed to learn and accumulate and build all that knowledge? What's your like trick and getting so knowledgeable about that field in a scientific manner?
Sure. First and foremost is personal passion. This is something that, I created the company selfishly. I wanted to create the best formula for myself and for my loved ones. And so that passion leads me to just this curiosity and wanting to read the scientific studies. And when I first did, it was overwhelming, and I didn't understand 90% of the words on the page. But now it's something that I can read easily. The second is surrounding myself with brilliant people, subject matter experts. So particularly in science, you have people that focus on very narrow areas. And so I don't need to know the depth that they do, but to comprehend at a high level what they do, and then going broad across all of the different subject matters makes you very well informed on the subject matter. And to that point, we have world-renowned scientists on our advisory board, people like Dr. George Church, for example. He's a tenured professor at Harvard and MIT. He invented the first direct genome sequencing method in 1984. We have multiple people like him on our advisory board. So to have access to these minds that are literally genius minds really helps to then be able to bring me up to speed and to know a lot more than what you would get from simply reading a paper.
That's fantastic advice. And I think what you've also done and created quite an impact and like a personal brand for yourself is your is a blog that you write, like Slow My Age, where you also like take all the scientific knowledge and make it accessible for a much broader audience. So I would love to understand two things about that. One is, first of all, like, can you tell us a bit about this journey of like creating that blog? And would you advise like founders in the audience doing something similar like in their field? Has it like been like, what has the experience for you been, and do you advise others to do that as well?
Sure. So I started Slow My Age partly because when I ran biological age tests on myself, for which there are many, some are much better than others, I found I was getting very good results. So I'm 40 years old chronologically, but my biological results are typically in my mid to late 20s, and this is according to everything from epigenetic algorithms to looking at my telomere length, which is that of a 10-year-old, and so on. So the lab that ran many of these tests for me said that they had never seen results this good before, and that was a calling for me to get the word out there. There's actually an influencer that some of you might be aware of who spends a lot of time self-promoting and saying that he's the best in the world with certain things, and I actually have better results than him. I'm just not as aggressive.
I think he's speaking about Brian Johnson, who shall not be named here. Sorry.
I can neither confirm nor deny. But I thought it would be good to put those results out there, also share my lifestyle, and then my thoughts on longevity. Like, for example, what's the difference between longevity and anti-aging? So I have a blog post about that. And to the question of whether it has paid off, I would say yes, definitely. So I didn't know what to expect with this. I just put it out there. And it's brought me many opportunities. For example, public speaking. There's a few documentaries that I've filmed for, fingers crossed that they get picked up by big networks. Press opportunities. And I think the value of it, just to clarify for the entrepreneurs in the audience, is that whenever I'm putting information out there on behalf of NOVOS, my business, everyone sees that as corporate. And so they'll ask for sponsorship dollars, or they'll say, no, we can't interview you because you're the CEO of a business. But when I have a separate persona, a separate presence, and I'm seen as an expert in the field, then that suddenly gives me a lot more opportunities, and it gives the press, for example, an opportunity to kind of separate me from the business and talk more about my personal results and my perspectives on things. So it has certainly paid off.
That's really fantastic advice for anybody here who wants to really go deep in a field and dedicate their lives to it, basically, as you've done for that field. You touched on that you got people like Dr. Church, who's like obviously a legend in the industry, to support you. How does that look like? You're like, just like, I mean, these people are incredibly hard to get, and a lot of people would kind of give up before even like getting those people on board. So how did you get him and the other people to support you on your journey?
Yeah, so ultimately, there were multiple steps to get to that point, but one of the things that helped the most was actually finding a nonprofit that many of these scientists were affiliated with, and connecting with that nonprofit and even partnering with that nonprofit and granting some equity to them as a charitable donation. And in exchange, they opened up a lot of doors for me to literally walk into the laboratory door of George Church and David Sinclair and so on at Harvard and other universities. And then, of course, it's just opening the door, then you need to actually sell them on it. And so the way I think I sold them was, number one, them seeing that I was a serial entrepreneur, so I knew what I was talking about in terms of building a business and so on. So there was some credibility factor there. Second was that I actually knew the subject matter. So I didn't seem like an opportunist coming in just profit-minded and greedy. I had a personal passion for it, a real story behind why I was starting the business, and then a vision. And part of that vision was to contribute more than 1 billion years of healthy life to humanity. And so, and I expressed to them, we're not going to do this simply by selling products. We need to do more than that. And that's where us being a public benefit corporation comes in, which we can talk about if you care to. But I think that they saw that I could make greater impact faster than they could necessarily do in the laboratory setting. And they were inspired by that. Now, it depends on who you're talking to. Like, scientists aren't typically financially motivated unless it comes to them getting funding for their lab, but they're not really personally financially motivated, the vast majority of them. So it's really about purpose, and why did the scientists get into their field in the first place? It's typically because they have a passion for improving health, for example. So speaking on the same page as the person that you're trying to bring, like know your audience, so to speak, I think is critical.
1 billion years of healthy life. I love that goal. That's like, yeah, I mean, that's like a tremendous multiplication of your like personal effort, right? Like that's, I think, what like truly like the opportunity for all of us is to multiply what we can do, and like 1 billion years is a tremendous goal. So while you had that bold goal and why you developed NOVOS as a company, can you share about like what was the most unexpected or tough challenge you have faced? I assume it wasn't, because now it sounds also like glorious from day one. You get all these great people, you get like all this like attention to your brand. I don't think that's how it was like from day one to now, just like all straight up. So can you share a little bit about that journey and the challenges?
Sure. So there are countless challenges. Like on a daily basis, I had a challenge I had to deal with. The first thing I saw when I woke up and opened my email, and hopefully that challenge is worked through already, but there's countless challenges. But the one that first comes to mind is we were working on a new formulation. We spent about 18 months working on it. We were close to being ready to release that product. And then a new scientific study came out. And it focused on the star ingredient in that formulation. And that ingredient is called spermidine. It has a somewhat silly name because it was found in sperm, but it has since been found in other things like aged cheeses and wheat germ, and it's in the human body as well. And it has a number of different longevity-relevant benefits. But the study that came out found that when administered to humans orally, there was no change in blood levels of spermidine when measured a few minutes after ingestion, and then 20 minutes and 40 minutes and 60 minutes. I don't remember if those are the exact intervals, but essentially that concept. And so we, the team of scientists at NOVOS, evaluated that research and then looked over all of the historical research again and determined that there's not adequate research to this point to make us feel confident that what we would be selling to someone would actually be having a benefit. And I want to be able to stand confidently behind my products, and I want to take them myself for personal benefit. So that was enough for us to say that as of now, we don't feel confident that spermidine is actually, when orally ingested, having any sort of favorable effect. Now, as a scientific-minded organization, we're open to our mind being changed if there's future research that conflicts with that and that ultimately proves that it is. But as of now, we don't feel confident in that. And so that was a big expense. It was a big financial expense It's a big time expense. And it also delayed our ability to bring a new product to market. So then that also costs us in terms of opportunity, financial opportunity. But we want to do what's best by the consumer and actually make an impact on people's longevity. And we just didn't feel morally okay with making that decision. So that was a tough one, but that was about a year ago.
Yeah, and knowing as a former founder, like delaying a product launch and so on, like you've worked on a long time, must have been very a very tough call to make. But I think it also relates closely to like the other things that you've touched on, that you're different than other companies. You're a public benefit corporation that I assume plays like some role in that, because you're not like purely like maximizing shareholder value. Can you talk a little bit about like educate the audience what a public benefit corporation is and what led you to that structure?
Sure. So a public benefit corporation is a legal status that you can take on. For example, we're registered in the state of Delaware in the US, and a PBC means that I, as a fiduciary for the business, can do things for the public interest that is not exclusively focused on maximizing shareholder value. So, of course, shareholder value is perhaps the highest priority, but it means that if I have two choices I can make, and one yields, say, $10 and the other one yields $9, and it's actually doing good for the public interest, I can make that decision for the $9 choice instead. And this was important to me because of a few things. One is because, as I mentioned, my personal experience, but I didn't mention while I was founding the business, I lost my mother to pancreatic cancer, and so I dedicated the business to her. And this was something very important to me, to do more for the public than simply focusing on maximizing profit. And in doing so, it's enabled us to release a number of different things that if we didn't have public benefit corporation in our minds when doing these launches, maybe we would have acted differently. So for example, we just launched a free mobile app. It's called NOVOS Life. You can find it on Android and iOS. And we have three core values in this app. One is that we provide a free biological age clock. It's not as accurate as the blood tests that we sell called NOVOS Age, but it is more accurate than most of the blood tests that other companies are selling. It's trained, it's an AI model that was produced by a brilliant statistician named Sue-Ann Lee at University of Washington. It's trained on tens of thousands of people's health data, and you just fill out a survey and we can tell you your predicted biological age. The second feature is personalized recommendations for how you can slow down your aging based on how you respond to different questions. So we'll tell you what to emphasize most. And then the third feature is an LLM that's trained on our data set. And the second version, which is coming out very soon, will also incorporate your own user data into the app as well. So it'll be kind of your partner in your longevity journey. Now, any one of these features, we could have had a premium version for and charge for it, but we made the decision that we wanted to make this as accessible and achievable for all. That's what we like to say in terms of our mission. And so that I don't know if we would have made that decision if we weren't a PBC.
Yeah, so anybody here in the audience can download the app, and I believe you've also started shipping your products to Romania just recently, if I understand correctly.
Yes, very recently. So Vlad, the organizer of this conference, very much wanted to get his hands on the product, and so we spent some time setting it up, and so yes, we can now ship into Romania.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Vlad, on behalf of all of us for convincing Chris and NOVOS to ship here. So you talked a little bit about like this biological age testing you can do through your app. How do you envision like the impact on society? What's going to change once we have access to these both I think testing and then like also like I guess interventions or other forms? How do you expect that to change society going forward?
Yeah, so biological age clocks, so the one we offer for free is fantastic, but the one we charge for is a blood-based test, which is going to be the most accurate, obviously. And what we can tell you is your biological pace of aging. If you're aging at a rate of 1, that means for every 1 chronological year, you're aging 1 biological year. But if you're aging like I am at about 0.69, that means I'm aging 31% slower than average, and you can be aging faster. So first of all, I think just public awareness goes a long way for people to be empowered with this information that they can actually integrate lifestyle changes that will have a real impact on their biological rate of aging. Then biological age itself, it's all over the place. There are many companies and people and individuals saying that they achieved a low biological age. You always have to ask them what algorithm they're using to come to that conclusion. But with biological age clocks, there's a new generation that you can keep an eye out for with NOVOS as well, that can tell you organ-specific age. So if I, for example, have a biological age of 27, I might actually have a liver age that's 32 from a decade of living in New York City, right? And so then the question is, what can I do to slow down that that specific organ's age, right? And then that's where interventions come in. So I think it's very powerful just in terms of public awareness and living healthier lifestyles with the longevity in mind, which, by the way, when you optimize for longevity, you optimize for today as well. You'll feel better, you'll look better, your skin will be better. All of the things that people are looking for in the short term will actually come when you optimize your biology for longevity. Yeah, I forgot the second thing I was going to say.
But that's amazing, right? I guess kind of like this kind of like personal accessibility is kind of like many of us having a scale at home, which I should step on more often, but like basically that's kind of like once you know that, then you can really do something about it. And like I think normally blood tests are not super accessible, right? Like and you're basically creating the stepping stones via the app and then via the more sophisticated blood tests that I mean, historically used to be like very, very tough for people to do. So I do appreciate that very much.
Right, and just to clarify, for the blood test, it's just a simple finger prick, and then you put a little bit like a coin-sized smear on an index card, and then you ship it in. So it's super simple and accessible.
Awesome. So one final question to close off. Looking ahead a little bit on the future, what kind of like breakthrough or advance in longevity science are you most excited about personally that you foresee in the next decade to come, let's say?
Sure. So I can take that question in 2 ways. So for us as a business, I'm really excited about automation of scientific studies and then applying AI to be able to observe those studies, especially with animal studies, and be able to automate a lot of that. So we're already starting to do this, and it can lead to 50, 100 times more studies in a given period of time at relatively low cost. And then on a biotech side of things, an advanced biotech side, the idea of cellular reprogramming, so being able to reprogram the epigenome, which is essentially which genes are turned on and off. They change as we age, and they change from cellular insults. And so to be able to reprogram the cells so that they're a more youthful state, we're already seeing in animal studies that we could, for example, take mice with old age livers and make them young again. So seeing how that extends into humans and being able to reprogram different organs to make them young again, it's very exciting.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris. You're available on the Q&A stage. Also, what Chris said, if there's any other longevity, like people passionate about that, come talk to Chris around the conference. Thank you so much for making all the way around to Romania. Big round of applause for Chris, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.